Hello, my name is Maya Ingram, and today we'll be discussing conflict management. This is an overview of my literature, and this is a way that you can talk about organizational conflict and leadership tactics that you can use in your workplace. This came from me working in a very toxic environment right now, and I wanted to figure out some ways that I can present to leadership, ways to kind of mitigate or change the climate of the office. So, what we'll talk about in this literature review is one, the reason for conflict, where conflict comes from. Second, how to engage or interact with conflict, and also how to spot conflict. And the third thing we'll discuss is how to transform culture in relation to conflict. These are some things that we've talked about in this course before, but this is just a little deeper dive of all three and just different ways or things that I've learned throughout my research. So, as you may be curious, what is conflict in the workplace? So, conflict in the workplace is described by Newpin as a misunderstanding from a direct result of something in-house. What I mean by in-house is something that happens specifically at your job with the people that manage you, you manage, or you work with. For example, if two employees are having a disagreement over office supplies, that is conflict because it is a direct result of something that is supposed to be given to both of them. That is what you want to think about when you're thinking of conflict. When your base needs aren't being held or being deprived, that can cause conflict in the workplace. Pondy lets us know though that office culture and conflict can cause innovation. So if the conflict causes you to increase your processes faster, it was innovative. Leadership also determines whether conflict is destructive or productive, and we'll dive a little bit more in that as we discuss this further. So toxic culture equals conflict, period. As we all know, we all may have worked in toxic environments. And some of the things that happened when we think about why it was toxic was task conflict. Were we clear about the assignments given to us? Relationship conflict. Was my manager a good manager or a bad one? Was she nice to me or was he mean to me? Are my employees something I can ask for help or they kind of standoffish? Power and control. What is the general leadership style in the office? Who controls what and who has the power to make decisions? These three things often lead to withdrawal behaviors. Withdrawal behaviors could be chronic lateness, could be unproductivity, non-motivation, poor work performance, and a plethora of other things. But these are some of the things that you can think about when you are trying to address or learn about toxic culture or conflict. So, as I was researching, some of the psycho and sociological foundations of conflict are the following. So, relationships shape perspective. Ayoko and Prakiti talk about how relationships shape the perspective of what conflict is. If my manager and I have a good relationship, they might not see my mismanagement of tasks or something not as good, not as like a bad deal. But if I don't have a good relationship, that may increase or make it a bigger or heightened sense of urgency to fix this problem versus not fixing it. Inconsistent leadership. Inconsistent leadership is another uh sociological foundation of conflict. If one manager is nice again and another manager is mean to me, I am not going to know what the type of leadership style is, therefore I don't know how to react to it. Professionalism. So professionalism is talked about in James and Alt. They discuss how professionalism sometimes suppresses emotions, and as leaders, we may be too concerned about job etiquette versus actually trying to make sure our employees are okay. So that sometimes suppresses your emotions and makes you just want to suck it up because we have work to do, that type of thing. And ultimately, all of this leads to lack of trust. And lack of trust is a big reason for conflict. If I don't trust you, if I feel like you don't make good decisions, I'm not really going to take your leadership, or I'm going to have a lot of resistance when you tell me to do something or when you want me to do something. So, one thing I want to talk about is communication openness. We identified how conflict happens and we talked about what may trigger conflict, but we have to understand that communication openness is a very key factor in navigating conflict management. Effective leaders actively model emotional intelligence, communicate expectations very clearly, and encourage open dialogue. So, those are some of the things that you want to think about when you are managing conflict in your workplace. Do you have good emotional intelligence? Are you aware of how your body language or your voice or tone comes off to people? Are you actively listening? Clear expectations. Is the office very clear about what is to expect and what is not to be expected? Are there SOPs in place? How is someone supposed to know if they're in trouble or they're doing something wrong if this was never brought into their attention until it happened or you didn't hear about it until now? Mediation. Sometimes you cannot sweep things under the rug, and sometimes you can't just let things blow by. You may have to step in as a leader and mediate a situation. Mediation is good because it increases communication openness, it increases emotional intelligence, and it allows for employees to name the emotion instead of just naming the feeling. I am upset that I didn't have any staples because I worked really, really hard on this project and I didn't want to turn it in sloppy. So I may have snapped on you or retaliated against you because of the staplers, but it was because I was really excited about my work. So mediation is a good way of kind of determining that. And the last thing is ultimately good leadership. Good leadership needs to model effectively and efficiently what they want their employees to do and vice versa. So, one thing I want to discuss is how to approach conflict. What do you need to know or look for when you are approaching conflict? The first thing is measuring the severity, the impact on trust, the horizon of power, and is this is good or bad for business. Measuring the severity is an clear indicator of what you need to do to address the conflict or if you need to address the conflict at all. Sometimes things are so far removed, you may not need to do it, or it's so small and small, it may not be significant enough. The second thing that you want to do is talk about the emotional strategy. What is the type of communication in place, or is there communication even happening? You need to know how the office talks to each other, how managers are communicating positive and negative feedback, and that will help determine the emotional strategy. Lastly, you want to think about the outcome. What is the goal of you managing this conflict? And how can you spot this earlier? Sometimes when you have good communication in place, you can see where a conflict is about to brew and you can stop it way in the beginning before it festers into something bigger. So, some of the key takeaways that I want to leave you with is one, conflict is inevitable. No organization is squeaky clean, but conflict means that you and your employees do care because if you didn't care, you wouldn't be mad about anything. The second thing is that toxic culture increases withdrawal. So the more that your workplace culture is toxic or unbearable, it will increase withdrawal, which will ultimately cause more conflict. Communication moderates conflict. So another thing I want to leave you with is that it may not be solved today. You may not have the strategy in place, but if you have communication happening over time, that will moderate or mediate conflict. And the last thing is leaders use conflict as growth. One thing I want to reiterate is that conflict is inevitable, but effective leaders use conflict as a way of innovation, growth, and to increase productivity. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you staying, and I hope that you take some of these tactics to navigate your next conflict in your workplace. Thanks so much.